Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining today. We're just going to take a few minutes and let a few more people join, and then we'll get started. Maybe while we're waiting, a bit of an intro. So my name's Matt. I'm the Director of Design and Research here at TestGorilla. And today, of course, we're going to be talking about skills-based hiring. But to start off with just a bit of context. Recently, obviously, we've been doing a lot around skills-based hiring. It is our kind of core value proposition. Just last week, actually, I read an article from the New York Times, which was called "The Hunt for a Job Has Never Been Worse." Now, in this article, it points out that around 72% of employers can't find the skilled talent they need, even though the average job seeker now sends 239% more applications than they did back in 2022. Which is pretty insane. So what we're here to tell you today is that skills-based hiring can be the solution to this. Why? Because it tests candidates on what they can actually do instead of relying on resumes and applications that AI has made easy to flood and easy to fake. So skills-based hiring isn't new. If you're in the room, you've probably heard this pitch before. But this session is to really help close the gap between hearing it and actually running it, from first principles through to working skills-based setup. So questions are welcome throughout. Please drop them into the chat or the QA function. We'll try and work through them as we can. And if there's anything that stands out at the end, I'll try and cover that in the Q&A section. But moving forward. So this is a situation you're probably all very familiar with. On one side, application volume has exploded and recruiters are getting flooded with far more applications than they can reasonably review. And then on the other, candidates are applying at scale and hearing nothing back. This isn't a one-sided story. The result is that the whole system then feels broken for everyone. Recruiters are drowning in volume and candidates are drowning in silence. So let me dig more into where this actually starts to break down. So what's happened is that AI has permanently altered what were once traditional hiring signals. A resume, a covering letter, or a rehearsed answer used to take effort to fake or embellish, and that effort made them useful hiring signals. But the traditional proxies are dead, and AI has rapidly closed that gap. Now, a convincing resume, cover letter, or an interview answer is now only one prompt away, irrespective of whether the underlying ability genuinely exists. Candidates are AI augmented, applications can scale infinitely, and experience is easier to simulate than ever. But the good news is that skills-based hiring is the fix. Skills-based hiring holds up because it tests and scores for actual capability, not paper-thin claims. Structured multi-measure testing, which includes skills tests, cognitive ability, and structured interviews, are incredibly hard to fake consistently. And that friction filters out the spray and pray applicants before they even reach human. So if the signal is broke at the top of the funnel, it's worth looking at the rest of the funnel, because the damage doesn't stop at the resume. A generic job post goes live. Anyone can apply instantly. There is no real filter at the door. Then massive volumes flood in, thousands of resumes and cover letters, many of which are AI assisted. ATS filters by proxies such as keywords, degrees, or job titles, none of which is a genuine signal of ability. A recruiter conducts a quick screen, relies on gut feel or guesswork because there simply is no time for anything else at that scale and volume. Skills checks are deferred. If it happens at all, and ability gets tested far too late in the funnel. Unstructured interviews, decisions based on impressions and anecdotes, not evidence. And when the offer is extended, it's often founded on weak or inconsistent evidence. And then we're all left wondering why the hire doesn't actually land. So each step is effectively compounding and making the next worse. And by the time you're extending an offer, you've made 6 decisions in a row with almost no real signal behind any of them. So what's actually defining skills-based hiring? So skills-based hiring focuses on evaluating candidates based on their skills rather than resumes or experience. It's a data-driven, objective, and science-backed approach. A correction to traditional hiring practices where hiring managers rely on resumes, subjective interviews, and self-created assessments to filter candidates. The traditional process is inherently time-consuming, inefficient, and prone to bias. And that results in missed opportunities to hire the right talent. skills-based hiring fundamentally replaces resumes and unscientific screening practices as the primary filter in your hiring decisions. So I'd love now to pose to the room and get a quick temperature check before we go any further. We're going to run a quick poll just to see where you folks stand today on your use of skills-based hiring. If you could answer the poll, and then we'll move on from there. Brilliant. So some great responses coming in already. Trending by the majority to reuse it for some roles, which is great. So that's exactly what we want to build on today. Thank you for taking your time. Okay. So moving forward, in order to understand how skills-based hiring helps build trust and confidence in our hiring decisions, we have to look at predictive power. And we need to get a bit scientific here for a moment, if that's okay. So this chart is from a 2022 meta-analytic study conducted by Sackett et al. And they're looking at predictive validity of different hiring tools against overall job performance. Here we see structured interviews come out as the most predictive tool, followed by job knowledge tests, but only when they're designed to evaluate job relevant skills, not as part of general chit chat. Industry experience isn't even on the chart because its validity estimate is under 0.1 at face value. Number of years of experience is therefore an insignificant measure when it comes to predicting job performance. So the conclusion is that skills tests have far better validity than any measure of experience and are more predictive of job success than a CV ever was. So if multi-measure testing is the answer, what does that actually look like inside an assessment? So Smith's analysis shows that multi-measure tests have the highest predictive validity of any hiring method in the 0.70 to 0.78 range. So the core recommendation here is towards multi-measure assessments that combine tests for soft skills and hard skills in a single study. The specific structure we recommend for that is around 2 to 3 role-specific hard skills tests, 1 or 2 cognitive ability tests, although ideally never more than 2, and at least 1 situational judgment or personality culture test, always ideally placed at the end of an assessment. And the total duration for an optimal assessment should run between 30 minutes and 70 minutes. Other pointers here include avoiding overlap. So 2 similar tests will often yield very little different information. So ideally pairing 1 cognitive test with a role-specific test rather than doubling up on 2. And then in terms of soft skills specifically, we tend to split this into 2 layers. So we have testable soft skills in terms of things like communication, attention to detail, situational judgment that go inside the assessment. And then for the rest, things like motivation, behavioral evidence, applied judgment, those will go into the structured interview or the AI interview or video interview stage as a latter part of the process. So that's the assessment logic. Now let's zoom out to where that assessment sits in the entire hiring funnel. So everything we've covered so far has been about why this matters, why skills-based hiring. From here, we're going to switch gears a little bit. So this is where we actually build the approach, and we follow 5 stages. So the first is deconstructing the role. Second is rewriting the job post. The third is to assess before screening. Fourth, to shortlist on scores. And finally, interview what tests can't reach. So think of this as a funnel, not a checklist, where each stage only works because the one before it was done properly. If you skip one stage, then stage 3's assessment, for example, has no rubric to score against. So let's take a look at this one step at a time, starting with the one most people actually skip, which is deconstructing the role before you post and share anything. So before posting a job, what we recommend is to define 5 to 8 skills as the core job requirements. This becomes then the scoring rubric for the entire funnel. So it's worth getting that right up front, firsthand, before rushing. That would include attributes like hard skills, for example, SQL or copywriting or whatever the kind of hard skill is required for the role. Cognitive abilities such as problem solving or attention to detail. And then role relevant soft skills such as communication and stakeholder management. Then the important bit, you need to rank them. Which are your must-haves at day one and which are trainable on the job? That ranking is what turns your wish list into a rubric that you can actually score throughout the rest of your process. And a common mistake worth flagging is testing for too many skills at once. So focus on the 5 to 8 must-haves that actually differentiate performance. Okay, so once the role is deconstructed, the job post itself also needs to change to match it. So some pointers here. Strip out degree requirements, years of experience minimums, unless it's a legal requirement or genuinely necessary for the role. And state instead what the person will actually do and what they'll need to demonstrate in order to succeed in your role. This alone widens your application pool. You stop filtering out people who could do the job but don't have the credential proxy for it. And with that rewritten job post, the real shift happens at the next stage when the assessment actually starts to run. So here we strongly recommend moving assessments to the top of the funnel. Therefore, everyone who applies gets the same evaluation before you invest time in screening. This would ideally consist of 1 to 2 role-specific tests plus a cognitive ability test as the strongest single predictor of job performance. Cultural add, as I mentioned, but mainly for context only, never as a pass-fail filter. And an optional work sample or situational judgment test to evaluate real-world on-the-job scenarios. And here, for more information, we've recently added a job simulations tool, which is a task-based assessment that immerses candidates in realistic role-specific scenarios, facilitated async by an AI avatar. So why bring assessments to the start? Firstly, it reduces unconscious bias. So evaluating skills before names, schools, or job titles, and sees the initial screening focused purely on ability. That's what we want. Secondly, it's a more efficient use of your time. Recruiters spend hours of time sifting through. So this means you can spend quality time with candidates who've already demonstrated that they have the right skills. Next, it's a more predictive measure of validity. Structured interviews, as I mentioned, scored highest, skills tests came second. And using tests to shortlist candidates for your structured interviews effectively turbocharges the whole process. You're stacking the 2 most highly valid tools back to back. And once everyone's been assessed on the same rubric, the shortlist decision itself gets simpler and more objective. So assessments then score every candidate by the same rubric. That gives you 1 consistent comparable score per candidate. And the scoring provides objective signals of assessment performance to help you build your shortlist. This is what we're aiming for. So assessment scores get you to, effectively, a verified shortlist. And what then happens in the room with those candidates also needs to change. So the interviewer's job is no longer verifying skills because the assessment has already done that for you. Structured interviews can now focus on behavioral evidence, so past situations demonstrating trainable or soft skills. Applied judgment, so a live case or scenario drawn from their actual role, and motivation and context, so why this role, why the working style, what do they need to succeed in your organization? It's the same questions, same order, scored on the same rubric for every candidate. That's one of the key benefits. And structured interviews roughly double predictive validity compared to unstructured ones. So that's the what. Now let's talk about the how, and specifically how long this actually takes to implement skills-based hiring. So I'm going to introduce here a 90-day plan. I'll go through some of the details. Rest assured, we will share this after the webinar, so you'll have the full details. But just to give you an overview of all the steps involved and how we see this playing out over a 90-day plan. So to manage expectations, firstly, you don't need to reinvent your entire hiring process overnight. Companies that successfully transition to skills-based hiring typically follow a methodological approach that builds momentum through early wins. This 90-day roadmap gives you a guide to implementing it. And think of it really as upgrading your operating system while your business is still running. There's no disruption to ongoing recruitment needs. So here we'll look at the first 30 days and effectively the most important to lay the foundations and groundwork for the rest of the process. The goal of each step is to have a documented, ready to launch process by day 30. So week by week, week 1, Essentially start by knowing your numbers. This is super important. You can't improve what you can't measure. So before changing anything, establish baseline metrics. That might include things like how much you're actually spending per hire, which is usually 2 to 3 times what people think it costs. The time to fill on your open roles, first year of attrition, diversity of the candidate pool at each stage, and what hiring managers honestly think about candidate quality. That will give you a baseline for you to build this process on top of and evaluate the impact as a result. In week 2, select your pilot roles. So not every role needs an overhaul right away. We'd recommend looking for roles that you either hire frequently, where traditional methods have disappointed perhaps, or where qualified candidates are really hard to find and where performance varies a lot between hires. That's the kind of sweet spot for success initially. So pick 2 to 3 roles where hiring makes a visible impact. Don't start with your most senior or complex positions. Build confidence somewhere else, and the results will be quick and clear, and you can build and scale from there. Week 3, build the assessment. So run a proper job analysis, as I mentioned, to identify essential functions, technical skills, behavioral traits of your top performers already, and also importantly, your cultural elements. So what matters to you as a business, as an organization. In week 4, design your process. So 2 decisions to really lock in. Where the assessment sits, as we mentioned, ideally this happens before resume screening, and what the score decides. So who will actually advance in your process, and what that process looks like. So you can leave week 4 effectively with a comprehensive funnel or map of this process. And that's the starting point for week 5. So week 5, you really need to prepare for this change. So even the best assessment strategies fail if your surrounding hiring team don't understand it. So it's a lot of engagement, onboarding, bringing the rest of the team with you. So focus on platform onboarding for hiring managers in particular, and show them the numbers, the results, don't just tell them. Educate, importantly, on scoring interpretation. So what do the scores actually mean? So the scores you've baselined and benchmarked, the rubric you put together, how will those skills scores actually help you decide and determine who to move forward in your process? And train interviewers to build on assessment insights, as I mentioned, not to duplicate them. So that's what the skills assessment is doing. And this shifts the scope and the capability of a structured interview. A caveat, you might expect to see some resistance from hiring managers who believe they have a special gift for spotting talent. But you can win them over with the data, not debate. You can show them the evidence that this is a better way, a better approach, more objective, more scalable, and with better hiring results. Week 6 to 7, launch a pilot. So communicate to applicants that their skills will be assessed as part of the process. Transparency really matters here. Tell candidates why they're being asked to complete a skills test and frame it as a chance to showcase what they can do, not a hoop to jump through. So if anyone's got any concerns about how candidates would adjust to front-loading the process with an assessment, a lot of the feedback we get from candidates is actually that this is a much better way for them to showcase themselves and their skills, which a traditional process just wouldn't uncover. Week 8, gather feedback. So after 2 weeks, it's important to reflect and review. Review candidate satisfaction, your screening efficiency, and candidate quality. As a warning sign or early caveat, we also recommend just double checking if candidates are dropping out at any point mid-assessment. It could be that the construct of the assessment that you built is perhaps too cumbersome, could be leaner, and support candidates more effectively. Skills-based hiring should really feel challenging and engaging, but not like an obstacle course that your candidates have to jump through. So with the pilot running and feedback coming in, the final phase is about refining and deciding where to expand. So weeks 9 to 10, analyze your performance. How's the pilot performing against your baselines? Look at time to hire again, look at candidate quality, look at candidate experience. And then in week 11, you can refine that process. So it's not a one or done activity. Adjust your tests accordingly. Adjust where you see the process being optimized for your roles, for your skills, for your candidates. and adjust how results are communicated to your hiring managers, because that buy-in, as we mentioned, is super important. And finally, in week 12, develop your expansion plan. So now you can build a phased rollout for additional roles, confirm the budget and resourcing for full-scale rollout, and use data on skills-based hiring benefits to secure sign-off if needed. Okay, so that's the 90-day plan. What does success then actually look like over a longer horizon? So you've successfully run your pilot, you've successfully started to roll this out to other roles. How do we actually measure that this is making a tangible difference? So what you should see after 3 months is faster screening time, more diverse talent pool, and happier hiring managers. Within 6 months, faster overall time to hire, strong performance from your new hires, and skills-based data starting to inform their learning and development. And then after the first year, better retention, fewer mishires, which is super, super important, and a clear read on whether skills-based hires are showing the high potential that we promise. So that's the full strategy and roadmap. Now I want to show you a little bit about how that actually runs in the product and lives inside TestGorilla. Okay, so this is our version of what the hiring funnel looks like. You can think of TestGorilla as a platform as effectively one continuous skills-based AI-assisted flow. Every step is designed to surface objective and role-relevant evidence for you to use in your hiring decisions. So let's start with a simple job description. With our AI job builder, you enter a job title, a few key details about the role, and AI will identify the core technical skills, soft skills, and tools that matter for that role. For example, if we have a job description for a data scientist, it analyzes the key attributes of that role and then quickly suggests a full set of assessment recommendations following IO psychology best practices. This will give you a tailored skills-first starting point as the basis for surfacing candidate insights. Next, so we have a library of over 350 skills tests that are designed to assess role-specific skills, cognitive ability, personality, and more across a whole spectrum of roles at different levels. AI recommends the most relevant mix based on the role definition, as we saw in step 1. But you can adjust any recommendation or manually choose alternatives from the library. So we'll give you recommendations based on your job description and role requirements, but the final choice of what goes into the assessment is yours. Next, you can also use custom questions to assess challenges that are more unique or bespoke to your company and your hiring needs. So here again, AI will suggest both questions and relevant scoring criteria based on your job description. And for each one, you can see why it's being asked, the suggested criteria, and examples of how responses would be graded. Custom questions can take the format of file uploads, videos, essays, or multiple choice questions, each giving you yet another meaningful data point on a candidate as evidence for your decisions. And then for high volume roles, video responses are especially powerful, where our AI can score unstructured answers consistently and at scale. And then for roles where you need to go deeper, we have conversational AI video interviews. So AI interviews simulate a live screening call without the scheduled overhead. So these can happen async at any time as a way to effectively screen candidates at volume. Candidates interact with a trained AI interviewer who asks role-relevant questions and follows up dynamically based on each candidate response. Each answer is then automatically scored against your job's specified criteria. You can open any interview to understand how each score was calculated, review the transcript or recording, and adjust and override individual scores as needed. And AI will collect the evidence, but of course you stay in full control of the decision. Now, once you've invited the candidates and have completed the assessment, you'll see all the evidence you've gathered. So skills tests, custom questions, resume scoring, AI interviews, together in a single unified candidate dashboard. You can then filter, sort, and compare candidates based on the skills that matter most. You can also set weighted scores, so technical skills, soft skills, or experience contribute differently to the final result and ranking. And from here, you can also track candidates through each stage of your hiring process, from initial application through to final hiring decision. And if you want to dig deeper into specific candidate results, you can open any individual profile to see their full journey. When they were invited, when they completed each step, how they performed overall, or by assessment. And you'll also see our behavior monitoring layer, which helps ensure the integrity of every result. It tracks things like webcam snapshots, IP location, screen activity, and the use of things like developer tools. So in conclusion, when the team starts to flip the funnel and evaluate for skills first, the results show up quickly. Teams see a dramatic drop in screening time, and that time goes straight back into speaking to the right candidates. Time to fill improves significantly because only qualified candidates make it through the hiring funnel. And when you measure real skills, hiring actually jumps because the process finally surfaces people who can do the work. And when you hire for real capability and attitude, early attrition drops sharply, often by half. When hiring is built around real capability, not guesswork, the outcomes get better across the board. Okay, I've whizzed through that. Time now for questions. I know the team have been working in the background and possibly answered a few of them, but I'm happy to dig in and see what we can cover off. Just switch to chat. See, Bill has raised a hand. Right. Sorry, I'm just finding lots of questions. Let's take this one. I'll take this one. So the question is, how do we know people aren't going to use AI to answer the skills test? So as I mentioned at the end, we have various kind of behavioral monitoring flags that we have in place in the product. This helps us detect certain signals of behavior that sort of strays from norms. Furthermore, at the moment, we are working on some additional AI-specific flags that we hope to implement soon. This should hopefully detect things like use of a mobile device, etc., where it's being obviously used throughout the interview. So there are some flags in place that already track various signals that we can detect today. And there's also work on the roadmap at the moment to continue to improve the signals that we can provide to you. And they are just signals, right? Like, so we don't actively infer or claim that somebody is cheating. But what we do is signal the behaviors to you as customers to understand where there are deviations from normal behavior. And then the decision is with you about how to sort of evaluate those candidates and consider their scores. Hopefully that answers that question. Right, next one. Zora asked, 90-day skill-based hiring seems too lengthy for our company. We are a logistics company. I assume that means that it's too long to get started. I think with the plan, we scale that, right? So depending on the size and complexity of the organization, you can obviously be a lot leaner. There are things that you can fast track. The things you shouldn't compromise on, obviously, are those initial steps that I mentioned. So the foundations of defining your baselines, your process, getting the hiring team around you onboarded and up to speed with why this is valuable. And then other things you can sort of flex around your timeline, right? So, but yeah, I think the important thing is that the plan can scale and does scale depending on the size of the organization and the complexity of the structure that it's being deployed into. Any other questions? Can we add our own list of, keeps moving. Can we add our own list of, that's gone again, list of competencies to test on? Skills, competencies test on. Yes, so you definitely can. We have, like I say, an extended library which you can use to test a whole gamut of different skills and competencies. We also, on our higher tier plans, offer the ability for customers to create their own custom tests. So if there are particular things that are missing from our extended library, you can still build those your own and deploy them across our platform. So yes, very flexible. Not only out the gate do we cover many, many different roles and competencies, but on, as I say, higher tier plans, you can customize that as you like as well to build your own tests. Can you recommend testing all applicants? This could then be very costly. Yeah, I mean, it depends how you want to deploy this, right? So it's obviously particularly effective for high volume roles because it saves you all the sort of screening time overhead that I mentioned. But you can scale this as you need. You obviously, anyone that you put through the process, we would strongly recommend that you put all the candidates through the same process because it keeps things fair and consistent. But yeah, you can deploy this for some roles if you find you need to leverage efficiencies there, or you need more signals, data points on those types of roles than you do others. So we do have customers that use for some roles but not for others. Ideally, we would recommend deploying it at scale across the organization for the purposes of getting full ROI. But it's flexible. Matthew asked, how do you preserve test validity when candidates can use screen readers or a second device to have AI answer questions outside the platform's visibility? Yeah, it's a great question, actually. So it's totally a balance, right? Like we are doing our best to support accessibility at the moment. But we know that those two things are in tension, right? It's the ability to use sort of other devices and mobiles and screen readers, but then what that means in terms of sort of the validity and fairness of the test. Does it enable candidates to sort of use other tools to assist them in helping answer those questions? And these are the things that we're constantly trying to manage in tension. So better observability, like I say, so that you can understand who is doing what when they're taking a test, what behaviors they're demonstrating, and we give you those kind of insights in the candidate view that I mentioned. And on the other hand, making it simple enough for folks who have access needs to fairly take tests on our platform. So it is a balance, it is a tension, and that's something we're trying to navigate carefully. Chris asked, what's the percentage completion rate drop off for these types of assessments? What industry that's been predicted on easy apply, one-click apply for years? Do you see any evidence that candidates are unwilling to invest time in the assessment unless until they see themselves getting an actual interview? No, so generally speaking, like the completion rate is, I think when we last checked, it's around like 80%, generally speaking. And obviously that differs for some roles and assessments and depending on the structure of the assessment itself. But it's generally pretty high. And I think that tracks back to what I mentioned earlier about how candidates actually feel it's a fairer and more just way for them to show up in the hiring process. So for folks that would have otherwise been ghosted or sifted out at the CV stage, it actually gives them a chance and opportunity to show themselves and their skills. So our completion rates generally are really good. And also the candidate experience is really, really good generally. We get a lot of positive feedback about the experience off the back of an assessment that have been sent. So those are two kind of critical measures that we check day to day. In fact, they're core metrics for us in products, which is candidate completion, conversion, and candidate satisfaction. Okay, how am I doing for time? I think we've got time for three more. Okay, sorry folks, let me just rounds. Right, I have got Bill, impressive, thank you. My concerns. Culture, never a pass-fail filter, but poor culture fit is the number one reason that executives fail and are fired. Sure. Yeah. Understood. Yeah, I think what we're saying is like it should be at your discretion, right? Like this is what the rest of the hiring process is for as well, is to really sort of dig in and understand your what matters to you as an organization culturally. What are those values, principles, and then how does their candidate show up? So yeah, what we're saying is it's not that it's not important. It should absolutely show up in your hiring process. It's just in terms of what we offer in the product, it shouldn't be set as a pass-fail. This is for you to dig into and use your discretion in judgment, best judgment, to understand about the candidate before you make an offer. Sarah, once you've selected all the tests you want, how does that present to the candidate as a continuous test questions? They can't tell if it's 5 tests or does each of the 5 tests present separately? Yeah, another great question. So when candidates are invited to an assessment by you, they will log in essentially, and then as part of the onboarding for that assessment, upfront we communicate what's involved in the assessment. So depending on how you built that assessment and what tests are included, etc., we give a detailed breakdown before they even start, which makes them aware of what's involved in the assessment, how many tests, how long it will take, and then they work through those as a sort of sequence of structured tests with intervals between, right? So it's not like one continuous flow. They should do it ideally within a single session, but they have moments between where they can take a quick break, resume, so it reduces some of the tension. But yeah, it's very transparent, very obvious what the construct of the assessment is, and each of the steps candidates will have to go through. Harry said, what case studies data do you have from SMEs to show efficacy on front loading? And it's gone. Sorry, I just finished reading that question. Case studies. We do have some case studies on the website. Please do have a look. They delve into, if I caught the question before it disappeared, it was around efficacy. We have a lot of case studies around validity, many things that we've done from our science and IO perspective that actually give examples of how our customers are using skills-based hiring, but more importantly, the results they're getting and data on validity of each of their assessments. So yeah, more information on the website. I highly recommend you have a look at some of those case studies. Thank you, whoever shared that. You might want to check out our reports and case studies. So there's a link there in the chat now as well. Right. I think I'm about there in terms of questions that were flagged for me. Apologies if I haven't covered everything. There was a mad flurry in the channel. Session I'm tested. How can I be in? Oh, great question. Let me finish on that one. I love the session. I'm ready to be tested. How can I begin? How can recruiters at TestGorilla find me? Can I practice some of your tests as well? So I assume this is from you're a job seeker rather than a customer. If that's the case, we do actually have a candidate app. So there's a candidate side of our product. You can sign up to that and log in. You, from that platform, can take tests yourselves. So if there are particular skills that you're interested in evaluating in your own time, you can do that by yourself of your own free will outside an assessment context and verify your performance on a number of tests in that library. So absolutely you can do that. Thank you for sharing the link. Great. Okay. For the sake of time, I will wrap at this point, I think. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you for listening to me and hopefully taking something super useful from this session. We will send a recording after the session to your inbox and all the resources you'll find with a link also to the detailed 90-day roadmap that I mentioned. If you are thinking through what this could look like for you and your own team, Of course, our team is happy to talk you through that. So please do reach out. You'll find a link to book time with us in the resources section too. So if you're curious about what this means for you and your company, you're interested to get started, or you already got started and you want to do more, please reach out and we can absolutely help you. Cool. I think that is it. So yeah, I will wrap there, say thank you once again, and hopefully we'll see a number of you for the next one.